1854, a British steamship called the Plague spent 118 days on the Niger and the Benue, deeper into this country than any European vessel has ever gone before. Now, keep this number in your head. On every expedition before this one, the river killed at least half of the Europeans on board. Half, every single time. Sometimes even worse. So, 118 days, deep inland, how many Europeans died on the plate? None. Not even one. And the reason was not the weapon they were holding. It was not because they had a bigger ship. It was something bitter they drank from a cup. Twice a day, morning and evening. So that cup is one of the most important objects in the entire history of how Nigeria was made. And I will argue almost nobody talks about it. Because whatever was in that cup is the actual reason the British ended up ruling this land. And to understand it, we need to go back to 1832 and to a man you already know from my previous video, Richard Lander. If you watched my last video, then you will remember Richard Lander, the servant who buried Clapperton, solved the mystery of the Niger with his brother John, and went home to collect the Royal Geographical Society first ever gold medal. The man who finally told Europe where the river went. Well, here is what happened to him. In 1832, a young Liverpool merchant named MacGregor Laird looked at Lander's discovery and saw money. Why wait on the beach for trade to come down the river when a steamship could go up and take it from the source? So he sent two steamers, the Cora and the Abuka, up the Niger, with Richard Lander himself as the guide, planning to plant a trading post right where the Niger meets the Benue. It was a catastrophe. Fever went through those crew like fire through dry grass. Of the Europeans who set out, most never came back. And Richard Lander, the man who had solved this river, was attacked on it, hit by a musket ball, and died on the coast in 1834. Think about that for a second. The river gave him the answer, gave him the murder, gave him the fame, then it took him. He had solved the Niger, but the Niger was not done with him. 9 years later, Britain tried again, and this time they came carrying a nobler banner. The anti-slavery movement, led by a man named Thomas Fowell Buxton, believed the way to kill the slave trade was to replace it with what they called honest commerce and Christian teachings. So in 1841, 3 steamers went up the river, the Albert, the Wilberforce, and the Sudan, to sign anti-slavery treaty and build a model farm at Lokoja. Notice something though, even the mission wearing its best intention was still about the same thing, deciding what this land should produce, who it should trade with, and on whose terms. So the banner changed, the direction of the ships did not. The river gave its usual answer. Out of 145 Europeans on board, about 40 were dead within weeks. The farm also failed, and the ships, they have no choice but to turn back. And that stretch of coast fully earned the name European now whispered about it. The white man's grave. Now, notice who that name centers on. The white man's grave. Because for the millions of people living there, it was not a grave, it was home. It was farmland, fishing water, markets, towns. The land was not cursed. The land was simply defended by something so small that nobody, Africans or Europeans, had figured out it was the defender. I will tell you what it was in a moment. But first, the 1841 expedition carried one passenger who matters more than all the 3 ships put together. His name was Samuel Ajayi Crowther, and his story ties this whole series together. Remember the first video of this series, The Nation That Formed Nigeria, where we explored the Yoruba Wars, the collapse of Oyo, 3 generations of fighting? Crowther was a child of those exact wars, seized as a boy when they broke his hometown, sold towards the coast, and freed by a British anti-slavery patrol. He was educated in Sierra Leone, and in 1841, he went up the Niger as a mission agent, kept a sharp journal of everything he saw, and came home alive while all white men died around him by the dozen. And nobody missed the lesson. If Africans could walk this river while Europeans died on it, then Africans will shape whatever came next. Crowther returned to Niger again and again, and he will go on to become the first African bishop of the Anglican Church. Hold on to his name, is not done in this story. Okay, so what was killing all these men? Malaria, with yellow fever right behind it. And here's the part that will make you smile a little. Nobody knew. Not the Europeans, not anybody. The common belief was that the fever came from a poisonous vapor rising off the swamp, bad air. And in Latin, man and area, this is literally where the name comes from. Grown men, doctors, scientists, dying by the shiploads, blaming the air, while the real culprit was flying around their heads the whole time. So the same mosquito that disturbs your ear at night when NEPA takes the lights, that tiny annoying creature was for 100 years the single greatest defender West Africa had. No army on this coast, not the Sokoto Caliphate cavalry, not Ibadan's war chiefs kept the Europeans out as effectively as the mosquito did. It pinned an entire empire to the beach for a century, and it did not even know it was doing it. Which means the question was never whether Britain wanted to come inland. They had wanted that desperately for 60 years and kept paying for it in bodies. The question was what would happen the day something finally got past the mosquito. That day came in 1854. MacGregor Lade, the same Liverpool merchant who had lost so many men in 1832, he fitted out one more steamer, the Plaid, to explore the Benue. The ship's surgeon was a Scottish naval doctor named William Balfour Beatty, and when the expedition appointed leader died before the voyage even began, Beatty took command. Then he made one decision that changed the history of this entire region. Europeans had long known that the bark of a South American tree, the cinchona, produced a bitter substance called quinine that could ease tropical fever. Beatty's change was simple. Do not wait for the fever. He dosed every European on board twice a day, morning and evening, from the moment they entered the river, not as a cure, but as a shield. That was the cup from the beginning of this video. 118 days on the river, 0 European deaths. The wall that has protected this land for 100 years came down, not with a battle, but with a bitter drink taken twice a day. Now, to be fair to the full story, the Nigerian historian K. Onwuka-Dike, the first man to tell this history from Nigerian records, pointed out that quinine was not the whole answer. The plague also carried fewer Europeans and more African crew, and was planned by men who actually knew the river. Which, if you think about it, only repeats the lesson Crowther had already taught. This river ran on African knowledge and African labor, even at the moment it was being turned against the people it belongs to. The historian Daniel Edrick later argued that the conquest of Africa did not really run on courage or ambition alone. It ran on tools. 3 of them: the shallow steamer to carry men and goods far inland, the repeating rifle to hold any position against far greater numbers, and before both of those, quinine to keep the men alive long enough to use the other 2. So, piece by piece, without anyone announcing it, the 2 kits of empire was being assembled, and the powder ground from tree bark was the first piece in the box. And this is why I said the cup matters more than the gun. The gun decides a battle. The cup decided whether there will be Europeans standing on this soil at all. Every treaty, every trading post, every soldier that shows up later in this series walked through the door that Quinine opened. Our great-grandparents were not defeated in 1854. No war was fought that year, but 1854 is quietly one of the worst years in this whole history, because it is the year the land lost its oldest bodyguard, the mosquitoes. Beatty himself never really went home. He settled at Lokoja, right at the confluence where the failed farm had stood. Lived there for years as an unofficial British agent, learning the languages, learning the country. He died on his way back to Britain in 1864. By then, the point was proven beyond all arguments. Steamships could climb the Niger and their crew could lift to trade. The river that swallowed Mungo Park was now a highway. And traders came. Year after year, more British steamers pushed upstream, no longer willing to wait at the river mouth for goods to be paddled down to them. And where merchants go, their government follows close behind. Always. The Niger had become a road that ran one way, inland. But here's the thing, all these men, Park, the landers, late, all of them died or suffered chasing one dream, trade. And the exact moment the river finally opened, the trade of this entire coast was transforming into something new. The old, evil traffic in human being was giving way to a new trade in the produce of the land. One product stood above all, palm oil. The same palm oil used to cook, that oil was as at then about to become the most valuable thing on this coast. And the struggle to control it is what truly began the making of Nigeria. That story is next, and it is where everything starts to move very fast. If you are just joining this series, kindly go back and watch the nations that formed Nigeria. Then, how British deadly obsession with the Niger killed Mungo Park. Because everything connects. It is all connected. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Britain comes for the palm oil. This history belongs to all of us.